Here are just a few times that Mother Nature took over. Number 11. Hurricane Harvey. Hey, remember Hurricane Harvey? Oh wait, that just happened. Well, if you're watching this in 2017, that is. If you guys are watching this close to the end of 2017, you guys should be well aware of the devastation Hurricane Harvey caused in the Gulf region, particularly Texas and Louisiana. The city of Houston was hit especially hard as they experienced historic levels of flooding. After tearing through the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, Harvey eventually made its way to Texas on August 26th, where it rocked the area with more than 40 inches of rain and winds in excess of 130 miles per hour. Considering 70 mile per hour winds are enough to flip a car, 130 mile per hour winds is nothing to mess with. Hurricane Harvey left somewhere around 300,000 people without electricity, displaced another 30,000, and left at least 70 people dead. The catastrophic flooding caused billions of dollars in economic and property damage. The silver lining, if there is one, is that at least 13,000 people were rescued. Journalists, police officers, firefighters, and private civilians all teamed up to save many lives. There's still plenty of goodwill left in the world, and that's gotta count for something. Number 10. Hurricane Irma. Soon after Hurricane Harvey wreaked havoc in the Gulf, the wrath of Hurricane Irma was unleashed on the southeastern parts of the U.S. Its first victim was the Caribbean, where it caused widespread devastation on the Virgin Islands, Cuba, the Bahamas, and Puerto Rico. Flipping between Category 4 and 5 status, Irma had wind speeds of more than 180 miles per hour as it set its sights on Florida. Listen to this crazy fact. Hurricane Irma lasted for 37 hours, making it the longest-lasting powerful storm ever recorded. A death toll of at least 90 people has been reported. According to FEMA, 65% of the homes in the Florida Keys were damaged and 25% were completely destroyed. I could keep going, but the pictures speak for themselves. Number 9. Oklahoma tornado outbreak. From May 2nd to May 8th, 1999, more than 150 tornadoes touched down in the middle of the U.S. Despite being known as the Oklahoma outbreak, tornadoes touched down in states such as Texas, Arkansas, Nebraska, and Kansas. However, the biggest and most destructive of them all was an F5 tornado that touched down in Oklahoma, ripping through places such as Oklahoma City and a series of surrounding small towns, killing 36 people in the process. While none of the tornadoes exactly reached the fictional status seen in films like Twister and The Wizard of Oz, it's still the type that people have nightmares about. Of all the tornadoes that week, that F5 I keep mentioning really was one for the books. On May 3rd, this tornado spent 85 minutes racing hell in southern Oklahoma, reaching speeds of over 300 miles per hour. That's the fastest wind speeds ever recorded on Earth. After devastating the small town of Bridge Creek, Oklahoma, it went through the rest of the region, touching down in Moore and Oklahoma City, flattening most of what was in its path. Number 8. Mexico City earthquake. Just when you thought 2017 couldn't get any worse, Mother Nature decided to flex her muscles again. While in the middle of a deadly hurricane, Mexico City recently got rocked by a massive earthquake, their strongest in a century. This 8.1 magnitude earthquake happened off the southern coast of Mexico while the region was taking heavy rain from Hurricane Katrina. Basically, like taking a combination from Mike Tyson in his heyday. Places such as Mexico City and Guatemala City felt the effects of the storm and earthquake combo, and at least 61 people have been reported dead. While that's tragic, it could have been way worse. For instance, more than 50 million people were reported to have felt the shock. Compare that to an 8.0 earthquake that shook the region in 1988 and killed close to 10,000 people. The more recent quake also triggered a tsunami, but thankfully it didn't cause too much damage. Number 7. Yungay Avalanche. The day was May 31st, 1970. After a massive earthquake in Peru triggered an avalanche, more than tens of thousands of people lost their lives almost instantaneously. Combine the death and destruction caused by the actual earthquake and the resulting tsunami, more than 70,000 people were killed. That's just completely insane. To date, it's the deadliest natural disaster in the history of Peru. The initial quake lasted for about 45 seconds, shaking the areas of Ancash and La Libertad extremely bad. That triggered a massive avalanche from Mount Huascaran that completely buried the towns of Yungay and Ranraherka. The deadly event has left a lasting impact on the country. For one, the area has never been excavated, as the Peruvian government considers it to be a national cemetery. And now, every May 31st is Natural Disaster Education and Reflection Day in Peru. Number 6. The world's biggest tsunami. You rarely hear about it these days, but it's worth bringing up since we're talking about natural disasters. Back in July in 1958, an earthquake hit the region of the Alaska Panhandle, triggering a domino effect of a rock slide that went crashing down into the ocean. Now, I don't mean a few heavy boulders making a big splash, but I'm talking about 40 million cubic yards of rock spiraling down a mountain at massive speeds to the Lucia Bay 3,000 feet below. This rock slide triggered an enormous tsunami that was measured at about 1,720 feet above sea level, the highest ever recorded. It reportedly uprooted trees and pretty much just swept away anything in its path. That was kind of a weird tsunami, since most big ones are caused by volcanic rumblings and shifting tectonic plates underwater, which force ripples of water upwards. The scary thing, it could happen again. The mountains along the Alaskan Panhandle for the Lucia Bay haven't disappeared. Remarkably, only 5 people were killed. But it did spawn a new category of tsunamis known as a mega tsunami. Number 5. Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina remains one of the largest and most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history. The heavy rain and wind speeds combined with leaks in the levees gave New Orleans the storm of the century. Hurricane Katrina caused more than 1,200 deaths and over $100 billion worth of economic and property damage. Making matters worse, the floodwater lingered for weeks. FEMA, along with officials in New Orleans and Louisiana, were slow to react. Places such as the Florida Panhandle and the Bahamas experienced their share of flooding as well, and more than 1 million people lost power. Plus, 239 people were killed on the coast of Mississippi. However, Katrina left a lasting impact on the city of New Orleans. More than 1 million people were displaced, and more than 1,000 people lost their lives during this horrific storm. Number 4. 1906 San Francisco earthquake. In the early hours of April 18, 1906 in San Francisco, a massive earthquake shook the coast of Northern California. The result was fires breaking out for days all over the city. Over 3,000 people were killed, and about 80% of the city was destroyed. This devastating earthquake was caused by shifting plates on the San Andreas Fault. Although the earthquake predated the Richter scale, it's generally thought to have been around a 7.8 in magnitude. How did the fire start? Well, the earthquake ruptured gas lines all over San Francisco, which caused fires that quickly grew out of control. Untrained firemen tried to stop them with dynamite, which only made things worse. On top of that, people began setting fire to their homes to claim insurance, which, in retrospect, probably wasn't a great idea. In the end, roughly 300,000 of the 410,000 people in San Francisco were left homeless. By today's standards, the city suffered somewhere around $10.6 billion in economic damage, but definitely still hard to pinpoint an exact number. Number 3. The Great Blizzard of 1888. On March 11, 1888, the Northeast U.S. got pummeled with 55 inches of snow. This was before big trucks with snowplows were going along the streets cleaning things up. Even for a region that's used to freezing their balls off, 55 inches of snow is a lot. However, only roughly 40 people were killed, so it wasn't much by the standard of other events. What's even crazier was that it was in the 50s the day before. But all of a sudden, cold Arctic air from Canada met up with the air from the Gulf Stream, and it quickly became a disaster. Rain turned to snow, and winds were blowing at 85 miles per hour. No one was prepared for it either, since people back then didn't exactly have weather apps. People trying to go to work were stranded. 15,000 of them were stuck on the trains. Water mains, gas lines, telegraph lines, all of it was frozen, turning a complicated situation into a dangerous cluster. The blizzard even closed the New York Stock Exchange for 3 days. Boats were stranded on the Atlantic, and states such as New Hampshire and Connecticut received record amounts of snow. The only good that came out of the storm was that city officials started to move water and gas lines underwater, and New York began building the subway within a decade. Number 2, Mount Krakatoa Volcano. It was August 26, 1883, when people as far as 3,000 miles away from Mount Krakatoa heard the volcanic explosion. Located in the East Indies in present-day Indonesia, about 70% of the island was destroyed and more than 30,000 people would be killed after the volcanic eruption also triggered a tsunami. While smaller eruptions occurred for a few days leading up to the final climactic eruption, it was so loud it ruptured the eardrums of sailors 40 miles away. Ash fell on cities as far away as Singapore, 165 coastal villages were destroyed by tidal waves, and coral blocks weighing 600 tons were hurled towards the shore. The effects of the eruption was so severe, global temperatures dropped as much as 34 degrees in some places, and it took 5 years for temperatures to get back to normal. So much ash was sent into the sky, it changed the color of sunsets all over the world. People in New York City noticed vividly different sunsets, a trend that continued for 3 years. To date, it remains among the most highly destructive and deadly volcano eruptions ever. And while Mount Krakatoa is still an active volcano, at least experts agree that the chance of another volcanic eruption of that size is very unlikely. For now, at least. Number 1, 2004 tsunami. It was the day after Christmas in 2004 when a massive 9.1 magnitude earthquake rattled the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia. That triggered a tsunami that would claim the lives of more than 200,000 people. The numbers are simply staggering and just horrific. For one thing, it was the third biggest earthquake ever recorded. It triggered earthquakes around the entire planet, even as far away as Alaska. Granted, the waves only got to 100 feet tall in some places, but it was clearly the most devastating tsunami of all time. Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Somalia, and many other countries in the region all faced heavy human and economic loss. Aside from the unfortunate people who passed, more than 1 million people were displaced. It was the deadliest tsunami on record and prompted a worldwide humanitarian effort as more than $14 billion from around the world was poured into the region. But still, the loss was significant, and the impact on the people, economy, and environment are still felt to this day. Here's what's next.
So, it's unsurprising that there are side effects from producing oil near a water source. The Department of Petroleum Resources estimated 1.89 million barrels of petroleum were spilled into the Niger Delta between 1976 and 19...